All right, so with the Cold War review sheet, those of you working on the test, feel free to keep working on the test. I'm just going to go through some of this stuff, and there's really not many of you in here, so I'll probably just cover a lot of this. And then if you have any questions or anything that you want further clarification on, just let me know, all right? I might ask some of you occasionally, if you don't mind, while you're taking the test. It's no big deal if you want to. If you want to chime in, feel free. If you don't want to, that's all right. Containment. Defining the following, remembering containment. Containment is that policy that we're using to stop the spread of communism, okay? So with containment, this is something that you'll definitely see on the exam coming up this week. Well, for you guys, do I have you on, what is today, Wednesday? See you on Friday when you take the exam. We also have brinksmanship. So brinksmanship, if you remember, that's the thing with Eisenhower. He's really kind of gung-ho about a lot of things. He's really interested, I guess you could say, in nuclear technology. He's totally fine with using that as a threat. So brinksmanship is basically getting very close to the brink of war without really battling. That is where we would kind of garner our idea of chicken, right? A game of chicken, two semis going at each other, and who's gonna swerve out of the way at the last minute. It's the same thing with like nuclear weapons. Two countries pointing weapons at each other, who's going to back down at the last minute? Something that you definitely see with the Cuban Missile Crisis, though we haven't really touched on that too much. Let's see. Lucy, what is blacklisting? Yeah, even if they don't have affiliations with communism, right? So this is something, it's like denying jobs, putting people on like watch lists, travel banning, all these other different things that might come into play. We saw blacklisting in Hollywood, the Hollywood 10. We saw blacklisting with what senator? Who's really pushing for it? McCarthy, right? With McCarthyism, he really wants to do all these loyalty programs, all that kind of stuff. 1994 to 1991, we have the Cold War. It is a war where there's not really boots on the ground. It's less of a boots on the ground war and more of a, I got people waiting in the lobby. There we go. Chase, glad you can make it. Sorry, there's so many issues with Teams lately. Hoping to get that figured out by the end of this week. With the Cold War, again, 1945 to 1991, non-boots on the ground war between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. Yeah.
I actually have a quick question.
Yeah.
On question 24, I reloaded the page and this image showing up here.
Yeah, which one is that?
Asking about the beginning of the test page.
Yeah, check the test page and then see if you get that. So I think I have a link to some of the slides that didn't show up on there. Okay. Yeah, so the Cold War also involving some proxy wars, areas that we haven't really talked about too much, like Afghanistan, some that we have talked about, like Korea, some that we've maybe touched on lightly, like Vietnam. We have the United Nations, the UN. It's a peacekeeping organization hoping to prevent future war and genocide. We have NATO, which is basically this military alliance between Western and democratic countries, right? If we remember, we have the Eastern Bloc, we have the Iron Curtain, all those countries that usually fall into the Warsaw Pact, which is another term that you might need to know, something else that you might need to think about. The Warsaw Pact being, all those different Soviet countries that kind of came together, places like Poland, Czechoslovakia, Romania, Yugoslavia, right? All those different, I think Albania as well. We have satellite nations. Does anybody remember what a satellite nation is? Is it a nation in space? No, right? What is it? Why do they call them satellite nations? There's a reason. Yeah, definitely under pressure from surrounding nations, definitely under pressure from the USSR, and they kind of orbited around the USSR, right? They're nations close to the Soviet Union, almost always, if not always, communist, and answering to the USSR in general. The Iron Curtain, that is that boundary between communist East and non-communist West. That's like that political boundary between the two, East and West. Communism and non-communism is a stark difference between when you are on either side of that boundary. Number 3, what are 3 causes of the Cold War? 1, following World War II, a lot of Soviets are like, all right, let's see how much land we can kind of take, how far we can expand. So Soviet expansionism is definitely one. And there's more than three, honestly. There's other ones too. These are just the ones that I'm kind of rolling with. Number two, maybe the spread of communism in general, right? So the spread of communism, we see it happening in Poland. Whether or not Poland really had a choice in that matter, not really the case. And then you see it kind of spread to other countries around. And then you see it start to spread to Africa. And then you see it start to spread to Asia. And then the worry is that it'll spread to the Middle East, and it does in some ways. Number three, definitely going to go with the Soviet development of the bomb, right? So 1949, the Soviets come out with the bomb. And that's going to lead to things like the arms race. That's going to lead to things like espionage, right, is definitely a big factor with the Soviet development of the bomb. And all those sort of things that are going to come together to lead to all the tension during the Cold War. Obviously, the bomb is probably the leading factor of tension here as to whether or not we're going to have mutually assured destruction. But communism is probably the biggest factor overall in the spread of communism when it comes to the Cold War. You could probably even put them on an equal playing field for the most part, right? Number two, why did the United States enter the Korean War? Any idea? Chase, why did the United States enter the Korean War? Do you know?
No.
No. What? Does anybody in class know? Yeah, Caden.
Does that have to do with containment?
Yes, it does have to do with containment, right? It has to do with containment, okay? So it has to do with the spread of communism. It's one of those causes for the Cold War. To stop the spread of communism in Asia, right? Because the worry is that, again, with the domino theory, if one falls, then what's to stop the rest of them from falling? Do you know how the Korean War ended, Caden? This one might be a little bit more tough.
What is it called? An armistice or something?
Yeah, it's like a ceasefire, basically.
It never really ended?
Yeah, it never really ends. There's a ceasefire, though. With that ceasefire, you have a border, right? Remember the 38th parallel, right? The 38th parallel, that's where you have the two differences. The north, obviously North Korea. The south, South Korea, right? Easy enough to remember. South Korea being democratic, or backed by the Democrats at least, backed by democratic nations, the U.S., the North being backed by China and Soviet Russia. What's the reason? Lucy, do you know this one? What is the reason for President Truman's firing of General MacArthur? Yeah, and then what's the big thing with this? So MacArthur's like, I want to bomb China, right? And what is Truman's thought process? What do you say? Yeah, he's like, you're being insubordinate, essentially. Like, MacArthur, you're being insubordinate, because MacArthur comes out and he's like, this guy's kind of a wuss, right? MacArthur's kind of talking down on Truman, which, if you're a standing general, it's not really something that you should do for your commander-in-chief, for one, especially not in that time. I mean, you don't want to do it now, but you definitely weren't going to get away with it back then for the most part, right? So going against your commander-in-chief, kind of talking down, talking about, going against what his policy is, outwardly saying negative things about him, and he's fired for insubordination, right? Number four, the following events in order from the Korean War. This might seem like a difficult one that's going to pop up. Like, it might seem difficult for you if you think about it, but just go through it, like, slowly and logically look at some of these, all right? So North Korea falling to communism in the context of all those other things, that's something that's probably going to happen after the Soviet Union gets involved. So number one, Soviet Union and U.S. remove all Japanese military from Korea. That also aims to the idea of this happening following World War II, right? So that's number one. Number two, North Korea falls to communism. Again, that has to do with the fact that following World War II, the Soviet Union is involved in North Korea. It's split up much of the way that Germany split up. Number three, North Korea invades South Korea, right? So for one, Soviet Union and the U.S. remove all Japanese military from Korea. Then, next, North Korea falls to communism. And then, North Korea invades South Korea. So, what do you think comes next? If North Korea invades South Korea, we got a couple options left. What do you think comes next?
I'm sorry, could you restate the question?
Yeah, so for number four, you might not have this in front of you. Oh, we got somebody else coming in. Let's see. Glad that more people are getting in. Sorry for all the irritation with Teams. It's driving me nuts. Okay, so number one, Soviet Union and the U.S. remove all Japanese military from Korea. Number 2, the North falls to communism. Number 3, North Korea invades South Korea. And then of these following choices, you have South Korea and the United States launch a counterattack. The 38th parallel is established. And China assists North Korea. Which one happens next?
Don't they launch a counter?
Yeah, they launch a counterattack, right? So, North Korea invades South Korea. We push them back, right? The UN troops push them back, and the US troops as well. Number 5, China then. It's like kind of like North Korea running back to their big brother after they got punched. They get pushed back to the Yula River, and then China comes forward again. And then they push all the way back to the 38th parallel. It's kind of like things go back to where it was. And that's where you end with the armistice. All right, that's where you end with the ceasefire. And that is where the dividing line is effectively between the two nations. Number 5, the Red Scare during the 40s and 50s did all of the following. It did the following. It blacklisted some people working in the media. We saw that with the Hollywood 10. We saw that with news organizations. It led Joseph McCarthy's rise to power. Yes, he definitely used the Red Scare to get reelected. He used it for political gain. Number 3, it definitely was responsible for the death sentence given to the Rosenbergs. It was not such a big deal to be communist, such a big deal to be maybe involved in espionage back then, right? It is unlikely that, Ethel and I think, again, I always forget his name, but I think Paul Rosenberg would have been executed. They may have been jailed, right? They may have been given life in prison, but they were executed via electric chair. I think that you could definitely point to the Red Scare for a lot of that as well. And then finally, it also encouraged a widespread fear of communism. It didn't necessarily encourage Americans to stand up for their civil rights. I guess so. It does, I suppose. It does in some way, definitely later on, but I wouldn't say that it's like the leading factor out of all of these things. And then there is loyalty checks. There are loyalty programs in the government. With that, you're finding more so, like we talked about the university, I think it was California, that required a loyalty oath. But I believe that it was the Supreme Court in 55 stated that loyalty oaths in government may have been unconstitutional. So I would roll with B, C, D, and F for this. However, I think you could make an argument for E, and you could probably make an argument for A as well. All these things do kind of come together. Number 6, describe the significance of Sputnik. What is Sputnik? What is it, Elijah? Yeah, it's a satellite, right? It's the first satellite in space put out there by the Russians. With that, it's the first satellite orbiting space. What does it kick off?
Space race.
Space race, right? Satellite goes into space. U.S. is like, oh, we should probably get on this. And then we establish NASA in 58. And then we start launching people and animals and all other sorts of things into space as well. So that kicks off the space race right there. Number 7. What word best describes U.S. foreign policy during the Cold War? Give examples of this from 1945 to 1960. I put containment. Did anybody else put something similar? What do you have, Lucy? Containment, yeah. I'd imagine most people probably would put something along the lines of containment, simply because with this, you are aiming to obviously contain communism. Okay, so that's the big thing. You want to contain communism through a bunch of different things. We talked about the Truman Doctrine. We talked about the Marshall Plan, right? All those things come together. And for some examples for number 7, things like entering the Cold War in general, right? That's definitely part of containment. Entering the Korean War and all these other proxy wars, Vietnam. The Marshall Plan, pouring a bunch of money into struggling economies in order to stop the spread of communism. The Truman Doctrine, stopping communist uprising, communist revolutions. All the things that we talked about with the CIA in areas like Africa and even Cuba as well. Overthrowing communist-friendly regimes around the world. Really getting involved in different governments to stop the spread of communism. And then things like the arms race as well. Space race too. Number 8, identify the Marshall Plan. What was the intended impact? What is the Marshall Plan? You know? Any idea? What's the Marshall Plan? Yes, what is the Marshall Plan? Marshmallows.
It's a plan by Marshall.
No. I'm just kidding. You know what it is? It's definitely part of the containment policy, right? So we have, remember, if you remember, we have Truman says that the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan are two halves of the same walnut, right? As for money, money is definitely tied into the Marshall Plan, okay? So the Marshall Plan aims to help struggling economies following World War II. Why following World War II, Lucy? Why do we want to help struggling economies? Yeah, right? So the stronger your economy, the less appealing something like communism is. Remember the difference between communism and capitalism? A lot more individualism in capitalism, a lot more freedom. Freedom of property, private property, all those things in capitalism. In communism, a lot more collectivism, right? Things kind of owned together. Communes, things of that nature. So the Marshall Plan is intended to help struggling economies following World War II so that they would be less susceptible to communism. It's kind of more of a financial aim for everything. The Truman Doctrine is more of a, again, kind of a proxy war type situation as well. Remember we talked about Turkey and Greece, stopping communist uprisings there, whether it be, you know, supplying weapons or money or whatever we can, supplies to help stop those regimes. Something that we tried to do with the nationalists versus the communists in China as well, but we failed. Number 9, what city did the Soviet Union blockade and what brought an end to this blockade? Anybody know? What city? What city did the Soviets blockade?
Berlin.
Berlin, right? Yeah, Berlin. Exactly. Berlin. In where? Germany, right? So if you remember West, East Germany, they blockade Berlin. Does anybody remember what the reason was for this? What was the whole deal? Yeah. Yeah, what for? Just fun, just for fun. Definitely part of it. War reparations, right? War reparations for sure, yeah. Yeah, and even that, I think that you could definitely make an argument for a measure of revenge as well, right? Yeah, Soviets during this time not very happy, obviously, with the German people, given the military invasion that happened in their own territory. And then also, like Lucy said, reparations as well. That's a big thing. Stalin's all about getting his money back for his destroyed kind of areas. Yeah, so that's definitely part of it. And what ends it, what kind of brings an end to it, is just kind of the overwhelming support of some of these Western allied nations with the Berlin airlift over the course of many months, eventually kind of wearing down Soviet control, forcing them to lift the blockade. Bad press maybe even is playing a role too. You know, it's not a very good humanitarian look to be starving out the population of the city. So that all kind of plays a role. Number 10, the rapid growth of personal income in the decade after World War II contributed to, more than anything on here, an expansion of the middle class. We see that actually more people are buying luxury goods during this time. We're seeing an increase in the birth rate, and we're seeing people doing very well for themselves economically, all right? So more than anything, it is an expansion of the middle class. This is one of those kind of additional golden eras. All right, number 12, list 4 changes that occurred in the United States due to an increasing of the use of the automobile. Elijah, you got one? What happens with the automobile? Just any change at all. What do we see? You got it. I'll come back to you. Lucy, you got one? Interstate highways play a role. Caden?
Become a lot more affordable.
Cars, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, cars being a lot more affordable. What about if you're traveling? Elijah, like, where are you going to stay? Remember? Where do you stay now? Hotels, motels, right? We see those popping up. That's definitely one of them. Nathan, what's another thing? Oh, no, you're fine. What's one of the changes that comes around with, like, the use of the automobile? So we talked about interstate highways definitely being a thing. We saw hotels or motels, right? Yeah.
More jobs and easier transportation for jobs.
Yeah, easier transportation for jobs too, which leads to what? Caden, do you know?
Isn't grocery stores a thing?
Grocery stores, that's more so in something that we'll see with mass consumerism, but it's for sure part of it, right? You can drive to, you had stores that you could go to before for groceries and things of that nature, farmers markets, wherever you go. So those are things that are kind of around, but you're definitely seeing like more like mass supermarket type areas. You'll see a change in stores where it's like you go to a mall instead, or you can get a mop and you can get milk in the same place for like the first time ever, right? So you talked about expanding kind of the distance that you drive to a job. So what does that lead to? Do you know?
Better job opportunities.
Better job opportunities for sure. But do you always have to like, where are most of the jobs usually located?
Bigger cities.
Bigger cities, right? Do you have to live in the city anymore? No, right? Where do you live? In the suburbs, right? So we see an increase in suburban life, an increase of the idea of like suburbia, the increase in the idea of the nuclear family, all sorts of things that kind of come together. Some other things we saw is like luxury car culture. There's more things with culture as well that are changing, things like drive-in movie theaters being a big thing, drive-in restaurants, like I said before with Elijah, motels, right? Some more travel. Number 4, list 4 changes that occurred in the United States due to the mass culture and consumerism of the 1950s. Anybody got any? What's a big change? In the 1950s. Mass consumerism, change in culture. What are we seeing with that? Chase, what's one big change during this time? What is one big change that we see with mass consumerism, with the change in culture? Just some things that are happening in the 1950s.
Hold on.
You're fine. Yeah, Elijah said Elvis Presley, so you're definitely seeing a change in maybe the way that we consume
Like culture?
media. What'd you say?
Like music culture and stuff?
Yeah, music culture for sure. And where are a lot of people watching this stuff? Any idea? Television, right? So we saw that video last class, or maybe a couple classes ago with like Elvis, right? The teenage heartthrob during the time everybody's watching his dance moves on the television. Television becomes a big thing during this time, right? We also have things like lawnmowers, things like dishwashers. What does that lead to? Any idea? Yeah, way more leisure time, right? Way more free time. It leads to people like golfing more, playing more sports, because you don't have to spend so much time, sitting around cleaning your dishes by hand or doing your laundry by hand. Or we talked about the supermarkets, right? You don't have to go to 7 different supermarkets anymore. You can go to one place and get all the things that you need. Takes away all the driving around, all the errand running, right? So more free time, TVs in homes. What do we see with money, money-wise? How are people spending? Yeah. Credit cards become a thing. American Express, that first credit card that was kind of like a buy now, pay later system, right? So that's definitely a thing that we see. And then, like I said before, convenience items, malls, stores, all that stuff. The next thing that you have is this map. This is relatively easy. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because it's just asking you to literally look at the map pretty much. Which countries are in NATO? We see a bunch of different countries like Norway, France, Italy, Turkey, the UK, Iceland, the US. Importantly to note, West Germany, right? Denmark. What countries belong to the Warsaw Pact? Obviously the USSR. And then other countries that you're going to see behind the Iron Curtain, such as Romania, Poland, Bulgaria, Albania. And then also important to note, East Germany. Why do you think nations join these alliances? Well, one of the reasons is, obviously, following World War II, if you have a poor economy, terrible economy, maybe you're more in tune or more in line with communism. But an important thing to note also is that not all of these countries had entirely a choice, right? You probably have a little bit more freedom in joining if you're joining NATO, but with the Warsaw Pact, you're a satellite nation. You have to answer to the USSR. If you're a country like Poland, where the goal was to give you a free election overall in the first place, and all of a sudden you don't have that, and you're automatically communist, whether or not they were going to join the Warsaw Pact is probably not really up to them, right? So sometimes it's by force, I would say. Other times it's out of a thought of self-preservation, right? Because the important thing to remember with NATO and with the Warsaw Pact is that if anybody attacks, I don't know, Iceland, then that means that everybody in NATO is going to attack the country that attacked Iceland, basically. It's like an I have your back program, right? Same thing with the Warsaw Pact. So it does, with some of the impact of these alliances, it can increase tensions. But at the same time, I think it can also increase deterrence as well. You're less likely to attack the country if you know 7 other people are going to fight you. No different than, like, I don't know, if you have somebody in public that annoys you. Specifically, my thought process, me at my apartment gym. All right, this is where my mind goes when I think about alliances and pacts. Me at my apartment gym. There was the one day where the guy came in and he worked out, and he was working out barefoot, no socks on, no shoes, and I looked at it and I almost gagged. I was like, what are you doing? But he had like 6 other dudes with him, so I couldn't be like, hey, put your shoes on, right? Because what's going to happen to me? Whether or not they're going to beat me up or not, I don't know. They're probably going to give me some sort of irritation, so I just let it go, right? So that's how I think about these alliances, right? So it's no different. Replace me with Iceland or something, and I go up, I'm not going to pick on Poland, because I know if I ask Poland a question that irritates them, maybe, the USSR is coming at me and Romania is coming at me and so on and so forth. So you can see how that might lead to deterrence as well. In a situation where if it was just me and that random dude in the gym, I might be like, hey, you put your shoes on, right? Maybe I will in the future anyway. So if I come in, black eye, stitches, it's because I stood up for what's right, right? That's what's going on. Okay. As for the final page, don't worry about this one too much, right? I know that we didn't really talk about Nixon. We didn't talk about Reagan. We barely even talked about JFK. So I know some of those things might have been a little bit confusing to you guys. I'm not going to go through this in too much extent. Just know Truman, JFK, McCarthy, Reagan, Nixon, Lyndon Johnson, all U.S. American leaders. Eisenhower probably should have made his way on this list as well. Gorbachev, Khrushchev, and Castro are Soviet leaders, right? Communist leaders. I guess not entirely Soviet, because Castro is usually involved with Cuba, right? But they have an alliance there. Khrushchev and Gorbachev pretty high up with the USSR. Some of the contributions that Castro made, obviously bringing communism to Cuba is a thing for sure. Lyndon Johnson, he was involved in a lot of World War II era kind of policies and leadership. Truman, you have the Truman Doctrine, containment policy, right? JFK, we haven't talked about it yet, but the Cuban Missile Crisis is a big thing for sure. McCarthy, the Red Scare, obviously, McCarthyism, it's pretty much all he's known for. It's pretty much his big thing. And then following that, he kind of fades into irrelevance. As far as Nixon and Reagan, don't even really worry about them. Don't worry about those two yet. We haven't gotten to them yet. Gorbachev, Khrushchev. Khrushchev plays a pivotal role in the Cuban Missile Crisis as well. But again, don't worry about those too much. Just know that Gorbachev and Khrushchev are involved with the USSR. All right? So that is what we have for the review. Now I'm going to set up this GimKit game. I think you guys will enjoy it. It's kind of fun.
What's it called?
It's called GimKit. I'll show you what it looks like.